Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Matt Bruggeman, Director Federal at A-LIGN. Matt, thanks for chatting with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, David. Excited to talk through all of the thrilling stuff that is the DIB and CMMC.
Some people may prefer to watch paint dry, but super important topic if you're within the world of trying to become compliant and do business with the government and defense. And really, we can talk about it later, but it's going to the entire federal government. It looks like that's the trend. So it'll be much more than just defense. So this will be great. I think super educational, and hopefully we'll be able to increase the knowledge base of the listeners. So let's start off with your journey. Kind of how did you get to where you are, federal space and leading, federal at A-LIGN, your background and what really you like about being a part of this ecosystem?
Sure. Yeah, I have a kind of a weird, long winding sort of career trajectory to get to this point. I actually got my degree in computer and electrical engineering, so background a little bit in the technical side of things. And then my first job out of college, I was interning there. And then my first job was actually at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the Air Force Research Labs doing electrical failure analysis. So got a little bit of experience working within the DoD and the ecosystem of contractors there as I was working on a contract. Then did a complete 180 from an engineer to do improv comedy. So I was like performing and teaching improv. And then I actually got an opportunity to go do that full time, where I would go into organizations and basically do improv for business training. So, come in basically like at all hands meetings or sales meetings or whatever, come in, teach like communication skills, listening through actually doing improv exercises with groups of people. So as you can imagine, the corporate world, putting them through improv exercises, sometimes that made them a little bit uncomfortable, but that was the point. Get out of your comfort zone, think on your feet, all those sorts of fun things. So I was doing that for a number of years. And then I did remember that ultimately I do enjoy money and having a secure financial situation. So I decided to kind of try to blend both of them. Hey, I've got a technical background and an ability to learn technical things pretty quickly. I'm, conversational, personable, at least I've been told that, I hope. So I started looking into more like technical sales roles, sales engineer roles, and I found a few of those before I found the opportunity at A-LIGN. And I was really kind of flung into learning and selling all of our federal services. So my background is not necessarily like practitioner first. It was like, hey, sell FedRAMP. What do you have to do to sell FedRAMP? You have to know FedRAMP really well. So I worked really closely with our practice team, sat in on assessments, really understood the assessment process. And I'll tell you, the best way to learn these is to go through and talking to dozens of clients every week about where are you at in this journey? What are you looking for? What has been your experience thus far? And then just as you grow into the ecosystem, learning other 3PAOs, other readiness partners, all that sort of stuff. And you continue to just grow and learn more and more. So over the years of being at A-LIGN, I've just worked my way up further and further and grown more and more knowledgeable, I like to think, to where now all of our federal services, which is really anything NIST based, so FedRAMP and CMMC are the primary players in that space, I kind of oversee all of that for us.
Very cool. So we have an employee we hired into improv, and during his interview, I said, "Tell me a joke." He's like, "That's not how improv works." Like, come on, man. You just said you're a comedian. You got to be able to do something with that.
I was hoping he would say that verbatim because that's my answer as well. It always is. David, I'm going to get you. Okay, we're going to get a commitment here on this podcast. So, David, you're in Boulder. I'm in Denver. I perform here in Denver. So I'm going to get you to come down. Maybe we'll get you to do a class, or at least come to a show so you can see what improv's all about.
No, we'll bring the radical team down. Good partners. So that would be fun.
That'd be great.
Yeah, obviously I don't know enough. I mean, yeah, different conversation.
The short answer is, whose line is it anyways? Everybody's seen Whose Line Is It Anyways. It's kind of like that. It's basically that.
Could we make this interview into improv?
Yeah, we basically are. I mean, we're improvising at this point. Yeah.
And just got to make it entertaining.
Yeah.
Well, for those who don't know who A-LIGN is, can I give a background of, overview of what you do, how you support the public sector, both broad and then specifically your Fed space?
Sure, absolutely. So A-LIGN, cybersecurity assessment and compliance firm. So what that really means, where we play in the sort of cybersecurity and compliance area, is primarily as the third-party auditor that you need to receive your attestation, certification, authorization, whatever it is, depending on the specific framework, right? So wherever you need that third-party validation of an assessment, an audit, an attestation, that's where we come in. So we have a team of auditors against all the different frameworks. So SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, high trust, PCI, you name it, we do it. We like to be that one stop for all of those different needs. And then, as I mentioned before, anything that's NIST based falls under federal for us. So again, that's, we're a FedRAMP 3PAO. We're a top 3PAO in the space. So we play very heavily with FedRAMP assessments, other FISMA NIST 853 assessments, State Ramp, which is now rebranded to GovRamp. And then obviously CMMC is becoming more and more and quickly consuming my entire life as more and more clients come to us needing help. And so we're a C3PAO in that space as well. So again, we're the assessor, the auditor that you would come to get your level 2 certification.
Lots to break down there, but yeah, the tsunami warnings have been going off for a while, and all of a sudden people are seeing the wave.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like we're at an interesting place right now where it still is. That's a really good analogy, I think, because it still feels like the calm before the storm, where people are seeing the wave, and you have differing levels of, like, I would say either ignorance or, intentional ignoring of it, where some people are like, oh, it's a mirage. I see that wave, but it's my eyes tricking me. Or, oh, it's a wave, but that's really far away. I'll bet by the time it gets here, it's not that big, or something, right? Like, people are pushing it off however they can still, I'm finding. And one of the main ones is, as of recording this, the 48 CFR, which is going to roll it into DoD's contract requirements and into their procurement process, is not finalized. Once that's finalized and effective, I think that's where, the wave starts to kind of collapse in on people. But I think what I'm seeing, at least, is a lot of clients kind of using that as an excuse to sort of fence it and say, well, that's not finalized yet. I'll wait till that happens and then kind of see how the phased rollout goes. I'm not sure what you're seeing, David, but that's kind of where I think.
We're seeing some take it serious. Some are like, I'd say, the early tech adopters, if you will, the adopters out there jumping in it, but many are, playing that same game. It's not real. The government wants me to do it. They'll pay for me. They're never going to get this through law.
Mm-hmm.
Costs too much. I mean,
all that stuff. Yeah.
Which I don't disagree with, any of those viewpoints. It's just, I think it is coming.
Definitely. And to your point, I was speaking to kind of more and more ratio of clients that I'm talking to that are taking that stance, but there are a lot of organizations who are taking this very seriously, we've been issuing certifications since the beginning of year 2025 is when C3PAOs could begin their actual assessments for certification. So we've had a number of clients that we've been working through. So there's kind of some early adopters, and there's a lot of advantages to that we could talk through. But yeah, I think kind of the mass adoption is still kind of sitting, looking off in the distance and going, is that really a tsunami? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of like with my wife, I have gone now deaf. I cannot hear her speak. Like, the voice has been there so long.
Yeah.
Narrative of CMMC has been around since, or NIST 800 has been around since 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
The threat of enforcement has been around forever. And so it's natural but even when that becomes law, I'm not sure, many customers, unless they are told by a program, director, are still going to even have they don't read it anymore. They don't care about it anymore. And it's going to bite. Hopefully we can figure out a good process to avoid that. But
100%. I mean, I think that's why these sorts of things are good, but they're also, to your point, kind of contributing to that boy who cried wolf thing that's going on right now, where it's like, CMMC, yeah, I've heard it. I haven't seen anything yet, but I keep hearing about it. So I don't know what the answer is, other than all of us in the market continuing to point to the facts and saying, hey, this is definitely coming. I think the closer and closer we get, the more evidence we have. I mean, the CMMC program is finalized. It is actionable. It is happening currently. It's just the DoD's enforcement into their contract requirements is the big one that we're waiting on now. But that's what's so hard to get across to orgs, is like, you don't want to wait on that, though, because if you wait on that, you're screwed. It's a requirement, a contract award. And so if you wait for that to show up in your contract, you're going to miss it. Like, it's
I almost think we need, and I'd say this, but it will almost take like a prime contractor. So take one of the bigs that loses out on a contract because one of their subs was not compliant. The moment that happens and the primes look around and go, I just lost out on X millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
They will have zero patience, and but you almost need like the shock and awe of something like that.
Yeah.
They ought to drive that on like actually deny a prime because of that. If they want to solve it, that would motivate folks.
That would certainly motivate folks. And that is really what we're seeing right now. So whenever I talk about and whenever we talk about, hey, it is not in the DoD's contract requirements yet, we still have a ton of clients coming to us and saying, hey, it's in my contract requirement. But that contract is from like a prime, to your point, right? They're going to their subs now and they're saying, I'm hearing all sorts of things, but anywhere from, hey, just tell us that you have a plan for CMMC certification and what it is, all the way to like, hey, I'm going to put in my contract requirement that you're certified by whatever, Jan 2026 or whatever that date might be for them. So it's interesting. I'm sure not all the primes are doing that as much as they maybe should be, but that's why we're seeing the market roll out right now, I think, is there's definitely some organizations that are seeing some teeth to it already in their contracts, just because it's not the DoD contract specifically, it's to their prime, and their primes obviously wanting to cover their ass at this point.
Yeah. No, it is. Human behavior is very interesting in this, and just survival. I mean, hell, there are startups that this is brutal. I mean, this is a huge item. This is not a simple motion to roll into your business processes. It's hard. It's operationally, creates work, and it costs money.
Yeah. And as much as we can all point to like, hey, well, DFAR 7012 has been in your contract for years, so you've had to meet these, that, does that comfort them? Does that change anything about their reality now if maybe they hadn't been fully compliant to everything? I mean, they could have been self-attesting and getting negative scores, but that could have no impact on their previous contracts, right? It's like, hey, I'm doing what you told me to. I'm self-attesting. I'm not meeting all of these. I have a bad score, but I'm self-attesting to how I'm doing. And they could have been totally fine, but now they're getting hit with the reality of like, hey, no, you need 110 out of 110 if you're handling CUI in order to get the CMMC certification. So it's definitely a big thing, especially for smaller organizations in the supply chain. But I do think that speaks to how critical it is to get with the right partners. I mean, that's by far the biggest thing that we've seen. Again, we have an interesting perspective as a C3PAO. We really get to know organizations once they're at the tail end, right? They're getting audited. They went through getting compliant, documenting all of it in whatever way they chose to go about it, whether that was, hey, internally, I just took all this on. Hey, I got with an expert RPO who could help me and really took a hands-on approach and helped us fix our gaps and all that sort of stuff. And everything in between. That is by far the biggest differentiator that we're seeing in terms of how prepared and how smoothly, we'll say, those assessments go is, did you work with a reputable firm who has really good experience in this space to help navigate that or not? And I think if you don't, it seems like the more cost-effective approach, but in the long run, it is most definitely not, because then you walk into the assessment, it's a total mess. Then you're probably going to go find that RPO, that readiness partner, whoever, that you didn't work with in the first place, because you go, oh shit, we actually didn't know what we were talking about. Now we need to go to them. So it's going to take more time, and then you're going to potentially lose out on contracts. So then you're talking about the potential loss in revenue as well. So it is definitely a time where organizations, especially those small ones, they have to make that ROI decision. It's a business decision. And some of them are choosing to leave the defense industrial base market. Understandable, right? If you're tiny and you say, hey, this is a small portion of my business and I can't afford, the ROI is just not there and I don't think it's going to be there, totally understandable. But I think for a lot of organizations, the ROI is still there. They just don't want to have to do it.
Yeah. And for clarification, when you're talking, so there's kind of two processes. There's the readiness process, so where they do the gap analysis, they do the remediations, it gets up to standard. So that's kind of the readiness side. And then you guys are then the auditing side. So it seems like, A then B, but something that, we're working together well on. And I think there's a lot of value. Talk to me about the advantage of pulling in the auditing side, the C3PAO, at the beginning of the process. Like where do you see the difference in turmoil, velocity, anywhere you see a change of bringing in a C3PAO early vice, now I'm ready, let me go hunt for a C3PAO?
Yeah. The biggest reason to not wait until, hey, I'm ready, now let me go find a C3PAO, get them under contract and go forward with them. The biggest reason is going to be backlog and timing. So again, timing until you're certified is going to be critical here. And depending on who you talk to, especially, all the C3PAOs are a little backlogged at this point. There are a limited number of CCA and CCPs. Those are the certified personnel that you need to perform these assessments. There are a limited number of those overall in the ecosystem for all C3PAOs to pull from, right? So at this point in time, there are backlogs forming in terms of, hey, I have X number of clients under contract. I am booked out until September of this year or early 2026 or whatever that might be. In general, I would say the smaller the C3PAO, the longer their backlog is. They have less assessors to put to multiple projects. And so I think we're seeing that in the market right now. Our backlog is thankfully, I believe, one of the better in the industry right now because we have invested very heavily into the CCAs and CCPs. We foresaw this and we said, hey, let's invest. Let's make sure the backlog is a differentiator for us. But even then, it's not like if you signed with us, we could start the assessment the next week, right? So the timing until you're certified is critical. Make sure that you're talking to an assessor as early in the process as possible so that you have an understanding as to what their backlog might be and when you can actually get assessed and actually get certified. But then also there's different advantages like you mentioned, particularly if your RPO and C3PAO are familiar with each other. There can be some streamlined efficiencies throughout the process of, hey, I don't have to play middleman in terms of all communication. That's fantastic. But really, your C3PAO is going to want to stay up to date on your overall project plan, right? So typically, if you get like a gap done, you have a POAM list or an implementation roadmap, keep them in the loop. Hey, here's what I just found out from my RPO. We're looking at probably, finishing the implementation on this date, wrapping up documentation, and then wanting us to start our assessment on that date. Great, we'll pencil you in for that time. Let's stay in sync. Oh, we ran into an issue with implementation. This is going to take longer than we thought. We're going to need another month until we can assess. Okay, great. We'll push that out. But you want to stay in touch with them, I would say, for timing primarily, but there can be other advantages as well.
Yeah, one of them that I think is a unique advantage is, depending on who they go with, there aren't a lot that have run people all the way through the process, right? There aren't a lot of RPOs or readiness companies. Even those that have, are they familiar? Is the auditor familiar with their process? Because you could have it in a GRC, you could have it on a spreadsheet, you could have on just papers, multiple ways to try to store this. And one of the unique advantages, I think, is as you're going through this process, especially if the C3PAO is familiar with the RPO, they're already speaking the same language. So when they put a remediation or, basically how to fix this problem and it's fixed, it's already scoped and known that, yes, that's the right answer. And it can be verified along the way instead of you get to the end. And now this guy that you got on the cheap that was helping you out was no longer none of it made sense. It didn't actually meet what you guys are looking for or the C3PAO. And you got to go through the whole thing again. That was someone that matters, or you're going to triple down. So I don't know if you've seen that before when you've walked into different auditing situations with your team yet, or
definitely. And I think both ways of that is really important. So like the readiness partner understanding, hey, this is what that C3PA is going to ask for in terms of evidence, artifacts, interview questions for what types of things, so they can really properly prep you for that, right? But then also on that point, without a doubt, whether somebody just decided, hey, I don't need outside consultants or RPOs or whoever, readiness partners to help me, I can do it all internally. Or yeah, my cousin Johnny, told me he understands 171 something, I don't know, he'll do it for me. Whatever that is, yeah, we walk into those and they are messes. They really are. I mean, it gets as egregious as you walk in, for our pre-assessment. The first phase that we walk into is we're going to review your documentation, like your system security plan, boundary, these sorts of things. And we have to give an assessment as to whether you're ready to be assessed or not, essentially. Like, do you have sufficient, complete, accurate documentation here? There's some other things. And some people just have barely any, if anything. Like they don't even have an authorization boundary, or they don't have data flow for where CUI flows. I'm like, how did you work out anything else if you don't even know where your data flows? It honestly blows my mind a little bit. So I would say, especially with the number of organizations that we've had come to us, come into that phase one and be woefully unprepared. If anybody's listening to this and they were having some level of maybe overconfidence and, hey, let's just walk into the assessment and see how it goes, I would say, please, please, please think twice before just going at it either alone or without some expert. And you can hire experts internally, whatever works best for you guys, right? But just make sure that you're confident going into that, because we've seen a lot of organizations go in way overconfident and it has not gone well.
Yeah. Well, you guys have run through 57 orgs through some sort of cybersecurity appliance. 5,700. What do you think the biggest misconception, for defense contractors have been about CMMC?
A lot of it, I think we've spoken on in terms of hey, I can just kind of do it myself, or I've been self-attesting to 171. I get it. I get the gist of it here. One of the big ones I think that I bring up with clients a lot that can be very hit or miss on whether they were aware of it or not is, and again, this is going to be more from an assessor's perspective, the assessment methodology that we have to employ. So we assess with NIST 171A, that's the assessment methodology. And one of the main things that I would highlight from that, everybody's familiar with the 110, right? 110, 110, 110, 110 controls. I would think of this as 320 things you're getting assessed against. And not a lot of organizations understand that. So there are 320 assessment objectives. So really quickly, what does that mean? What's the difference in the number there? So for each of the 110 practices or controls that you need to meet, there are X number of assessment objectives underneath each of those, and those total 320 then. So as a C3PAO, when we come in, we don't go, hey, control 3.1.1, met or not met. Cool, let's move on to the next one for each of the 110. We actually go 3.1.1A, met or not met, B, met or not met, C, and so on, right? And those are the assessment objectives. So you need to meet each of the 320 assessment objectives actually to meet the 110 ultimately. And so if anybody's listening and like they're not familiar with that, I would say there's a couple resources. We have some of them as well, but the DoD has some resources that outline what those actual assessment objectives are. And when you're planning and preparing for the assessment, go through each of those 320 and say, not only are we compliant, but then furthermore, are we ready to get assessed? Do we have sufficient evidence, artifacts, ability to answer interview questions to prove that we're actually doing all of those things?
Yeah. So partnerships matter in this, as we've already discussed. So if you have let's say a readiness organization, an RPO you've done work with, they do high quality, that's going to be more efficient for you, right? Because there's already trust. There's already, the language, it's common terms and vernaculars being used.
Yeah.
Do you end up is there a discount opportunity for that if they use someone that you're familiar with? Or are there any ways to share that efficiency with your customers?
Definitely. Yeah. I would say one of the big ones is, again, so that phase one, we usually catch any major issues. And when they do work with, a partner RPO that we're familiar with and we know does really great work, yeah, we have the confidence that they'll move through that assessment more quickly. So in general, yes, it's a little bit of a case-by-case basis, but if you're working with a partnering organization that, again, we have that trust in, we have seen through history, it's not just, conceptual, oh, let's see if this pans out in the end. We've seen through data points prior that that's going to be a smoother assessment process for us, literally going to save us time and headache. So we will pass that on to the client. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So again, oftentimes it's good to go to your assessor, at the same time as you're looking for a readiness team and see if you can marry those up.
Yep. Yeah, because if we don't know that, obviously we can't pass that along. But that's obviously some stuff that we try to understand. Also, try to have an understanding of your scope, at least at a high level, before you have a conversation. I'm happy to have a conversation at any stage, right? Because even if I can be helpful in like guiding clients to specific documentation, depending on where they're at, or to the right partners of, hey, this would be a really good partner based on where you're at. And then you might want to look at X or Y or Z. I really pride myself on trying to map that out for a lot of different clients. But once you're looking for a quote, that's another thing that I get a lot. People come to me, hey, what's this going to cost? What's this going to cost? What's this going to cost? And then I'll ask like 2 or 3 very high level, very basic scoping questions. And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, you're probably not ready to have something scoped to get a cost or to move into the assessment. So I would say definitely have at least a sense of your scope. And that can give me a sense when I ask that question as to like how ready you actually are, and thus which partners or where you need to start in the process. Because if you go, yeah, I don't know, like the data flow thing you talked about, just a very basic, like, okay, well, do you handle CUI? Where does it flow within your organization? All that sort of stuff. And they're like, yeah, I don't really know. I'm like, well, that's not good. You probably need to get a handle on that. So I would say if you're reaching out to C3PAOs to get, hey, give me a firm fixed fee quote, and you can't answer like very basic scoping questions, like you're probably not going to get that firm fixed fee quote. I'll give you a ballpark, right, of what we see, but I have run into that a lot too.
So if you were to pick, of the 110 controls or 320 control objectives, if you will, what is I would say the most often, control that's tripping up, companies, control object, whichever one is most.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I would say, honestly, going even higher level than a specific control and kind of going back to the documentation conversation, I would say we've seen a shockingly high number of organizations going through without a proper understanding of their scope. Again, but in this sense, I mean, even looking at like something like vendors and vendor risk, external service providers, them not being able to properly tell us, hey, this external service provider falls into this category, and we know we're going to need that documentation from them as part of our overall compliance, which, because that bleeds into a lot of different controls, right? But that's a higher level issue that we've seen kind of across the board is orgs not having a good understanding as to the overall scope, not just you, but your external service providers as well. So I would say definitely think through and strategize very early in the process in terms of who you're working with, especially if you're working like with an MSP, MSSP, if you're sending CUI to somebody else as an external service provider, if you're sending it into the cloud, FedRAMP comes into play, and even FedRAMP authorized or equivalent. And I think a lot of clients just really do not understand that, and they have not even properly scoped like, oh, this is my external service provider. They're responsible for this security protection data with these security protection assets. And we're having to uncover that. And then it just like, again, it's like, well, you're not ready. You need to go back. So that obviously bleeds into a lot of things, but I did want to highlight that because that's something we're seeing a lot.
Yeah, and that's a big deal too, because that's an infrastructure issue oftentimes. And so you're now going to have to go back, find new vendors, get it into your system, re-identify, get their paperwork, understand how they're doing it, build it back into your plan. No, and that's what partnerships matter. I mean, it can be good, but you get the wrong partner, it can be not so good.
Definitely. I've seen that as well, unfortunately. I mean, understandably, this is a large addressable market here. A lot of organizations are going to need help. So just keep an eye out for those that may be just trying to take advantage of that and be like, hey, I'll spin up a business to profit off of this CMMC thing. And it should be pretty easy to suss those players out, right? Have you been around this for a while? Have you been doing this? What do you do? But I would definitely be cautious of anybody that's trying to just come in and offer like hey, here's your one CMMC in a box. Like, here's your one solution, really cheap and easy and all that sort of stuff. I think they're just trying to take advantage of those with not in the know. And that is really going to screw you over in the end. Basically exactly how we talked about before. We're going to come in as the auditor. We're going to come in to assess you. We're going to say, this is not right at all. And then you're going to have wasted what little money you spent on them. You're going to have wasted the assessment cost with us. And then you're going to have to go start over with readiness and then get reassessed. So make sure you get it right the first time with the right partners for sure.
Yeah. And you can look at some of that. They'll have that listed out of Cyber AB has a list of vendors that have been vetted at some level. You still have folks that can get vetted that still not necessarily, top shelf.
You certainly can. It's a good place to start. Yeah, certainly go to the Cyber AB, validate that they are whatever they say they are. If they say, hey, we're a C3PAO, we're an RPO, or individually, if they say, hey, I'm a CCA or whatever that might be, I would say, yeah, go to the Cyber AB website and validate that. But then to your point, I would still dig in a little bit, ask some qualifying questions. Like, you want to make sure they know their stuff. Because if you bring somebody in who's supposed to be the expert and then they're a little iffy on it, you're totally screwed.
Yeah. So there are three, I'd say, the way I look, I got three cost buckets, but maybe I'm sure there are more. But there's infrastructure cost bucket that a company has to do something. So things like you've got to get into a GovCloud email data storage. So whether that's GCC High, Google Gov, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah.
So that's a different licensing mechanism. You've got to have security infrastructure, from authorized US only endpoint solutions that they're managed. They need to be managed by the right groups. You've got vulnerability. So multiple security solutions that have to be layered on top of this. Then there's the process management of doing what we see a lot of times is someone will come to a gap assessment and then drop off a list of, 100 pages of crap. And you got to go remediate it. So again, that's kind of the middle bucket of how do you get ready? So you got infrastructure readiness. Then we get tiers. So the costs are very hard to figure out. There's so, how many people touch CUI? How do you scope it? Which you normally want guidance for that. When we get to the auditing side, I think that cost oftentimes in company CEOs or, whoever's in charge of this drops off. Like, okay, then I'll just go get audited. There's a cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you see, and I know this is hard because you guys,
sure.
But if you were to kind of put on guidance or perspective of how do you price and ballpark for maybe, let's say, a 25-person company or 100-person company? How do you look at that? And then there's also, it's one site or it's multiple sites.
Definitely. Yeah. And those are big factors. I would say the number of sites is one of the bigger factors. It is very scope dependent. We don't necessarily just look at the org size and say, oh, 25-person headcount, here's your cost. 250, here's your cost. 1,000, it is definitely scope dependent because you can have a massive enterprise organization. They've only set up a small enclave and there's a handful of personnel and other assets that are touching it. That's a small scope. Large enterprise, small scope. And vice versa. You can have a small 50-person company, but every person is in scope and there's multiple locations and there's physical QE on with drawings at multiple different sites touching a bunch of different like operational technologies. Like there's all sorts of ways that headcount and scope can be kind of inversely proportional. But I would say in general, I would say this for A-LIGN and from my knowledge on the general C3PAO market, I think we're seeing most assessments fall somewhere between that like $40,000 to $80,000 range, just as like a rough order of magnitude. That's our quotes, but then also like competitively, and when I talk to others in the space that I know, that's generally where people are pricing. Are there some six-figure scopes? Yes, we have seen them. I've seen them with other C3PAOs. Those are, again, exceptionally rare and massive scopes that are unique. But the small, typical DIB organization, no, you will not be receiving like a six-figure quote. You're probably on the lower end of that to where you're looking at needing to budget in like a $40,000 to $60,000 assessment.
What's the cheapest you've seen, just out of curiosity?
So I will say this, the Cyber AB, our accreditation body, has been, I think, pretty diligent about price gouging on both ends that they've called out for vendors that are coming in and undercutting the overall market, which makes them question the quality of the work that they're doing, given the requirements that they have in terms of the number of personnel we need with what qualifications to do what amount of work, but then on the high end as well. So we had heard of some vendors pricing around like the 20 to 30K mark. And I know that the Cyber AB was cracking down on that as like, hey, we know the requirements that you need and where the rest of the market price is at. So that draws into question some things for us. So that's why I say that 40K is really what I see as the floor now. Maybe some vendors are still in the 30 to 35K as the floor, but I would be surprised if people listening go and get like a quote or certainly multiple quotes around or below that.
Yeah, it's just great perspective to have because that's not built in for folks.
No, to your point, and again, that's why I probably talk to a C3PAO in the beginning of the process, just so that you can get a sense of that and make sure that you're building that into your budget, because most people, it is overlooked. Either it's ignored as like, oh yeah, I will need to pay an assessor, or I think more often, yeah, they just hand wave it as, yeah, it'd be a $5,000 come in for a day, whatever. It's a pretty involved process. Again, there has to be 3 CCAs per assessment. There's only so many CCAs, CMMC certified assessors, in the world, and we're all drawing from the same resources. Those are not cheap resources. So yeah, any way that you go about it, like it's a pretty involved process, and I think for a reason. We have to validate a lot of things, and we're really trying to ultimately make sure that we're protecting national security and none of this information gets in the wrong hands.
So A-LIGN comes in with a great reputation, obviously great success, track record. What would you say your competitive advantages are? Why start with A-LIGN?
Yeah, I mean, there is the track record. First, I would point to our experience with NIST-based assessments. Obviously, CMMC assessments and certifications are newer, so I don't point to that as much. I could certainly talk to the number of clients that we're working with, but I like to look at like years of experience, right, versus like a few months. So I point to the years that we've been performing NIST 853 and 800-171 assessments for clients and all the different flavors of it. And that's why I always point to FedRAMP. It's a different control framework. It is for cloud service offerings, yes, but it's been around for years and years. It is pulled from 853 controls, which 800-171 also pulled from 853 controls. And we're a top 3 FedRAMP assessor in the space. So we've had a whole dedicated federal team that knows NIST really well, assessing for years. And then we've continued to ramp up our CCA and CCP resources, as I mentioned before. The other thing I would mention is our backlog. I think I had kind of briefly mentioned it. We have one of the better backlogs in the industry. So if timing is going to be a big concern for you, I would say reach out and ask us. It's going to fluctuate for sure, but ask us what it is at any given time. Again, from what I've heard, I could be wrong here, but from what I've heard from clients that we're talking to when they're saying, hey, this is what I heard from other vendors, or just me talking to other C3PAOs, the backlogs are getting 3, 6, 9+ months for some of these small C3PAOs just because they don't have the resources for it. So for most organizations, that's going to be too long for them to wait in line, especially by the time they get in line, which who knows when that'll be. So I would say our timeline to be able to actually start, the experience that we have, and then something we've talked about a lot here, like our partner network. We have an incredible partner network, and we work really hard to make sure that they're vetted, that they're quality, but then also that we work as efficiently as we can with them, that they understand our assessment process so that they can properly prep you, and vice versa. And I think overall it just makes for a smooth, efficient process, or as smooth and efficient as possible with federal frameworks.
Perfect. So what would you say is how do you see the relationship between compliance and security?
Oh, that's a fun one. Yeah. I would say, depending on the framework, they align more or less, right? Because the framework kind of picks like what you need to be compliant towards and how secure that actually is. And I think you see varying levels, or even by domain, like some domains, people could have bigger pushback or arguments around, hey, being compliant to this is not actually being secure because yada, yada, yada. And I think there's justifications to be made in those areas. But I would say compliance, it is the way. Like, how are you going to, in any other way, ensure that others know that you are secure and that you will protect their data and that you have security without compliance? I think in general, the two align pretty well. And again, I think it's pretty framework dependent. But yeah, I think that's why feedback is really important. And I think, anybody that has any of those qualms, hey, when they publish like, hey, this is the draft of whatever, 800-171 revision X, provide your feedback. Hey, I don't think this would actually be secure. I think it should be that. That's the type of feedback that they need. And then people complain when these requirements come down, and then they weren't even part of the public comment period providing feedback. So I would say if you're in the camp of disagreeing with some of the compliance requirements for thinking that they are lacking actual security, provide that input and try to be part of fixing it.
Yeah, it's hard for companies. That's probably good for your providers. Companies, security is a foreign word. They don't know anything about security, really. I mean, they know we need to be secure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people like, oh, if you do this, you'll never get breached, which is not the case. It's a full flow. And then same thing with compliance. It's a different language. It is very hard to, as a generalist, come in and figure out what the heck the compliance wording is.
Definitely. And this kind of speaks to one thing I tell clients all the time is two main buckets. Get ready for the audit, get audited. One thing that I think is often forgotten in the get ready for the audit phase, and you spoke about a lot of that because obviously, you guys do great work with a lot of those steps. Getting ready for the actual assessment, I think, is forgotten about because they think we have the technical implementation, we have the documentation together, we are compliant, we're meeting all of these things. Cool. Are you ready to prove that to a C3PAO? That is different. It's not necessarily one-to-one. And that's where you go back to have a good understanding as to like, what is a C3PAO going to actually ask for in terms of how you're going to validate that? How are you going to prove it? I don't think a lot of organizations spend much, if any, time thinking about that piece. Am I getting ready for somebody to come in and validate that I'm doing what I say I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, we got to wrap this up. But before we go, what are some of the most common questions you get about this whole journey?
Can I get out of it?
Yes, that is one of those.
That is one of them.
Does it apply to me?
Applicability is a fun thing. Yeah, there's a lot of that of like, hey, yeah, is this applicable? What level? But then also when you get into like cloud service providers, that's a fun little nuance that we don't have to spend too much time on. I kind of briefly mentioned it, but if you're storing, transmitting, or processing CUI and you have a cloud service offering, technically the way that you get compliance to CMMC is through FedRAMP, oddly enough. They point to, hey, if CUI goes into a cloud service offering, you need to be FedRAMP authorized or equivalent. And to quickly go on my tangent of what is equivalent, because I do get a lot of questions around FedRAMP equivalency because it's kind of the conversion point. It's the Venn diagram of FedRAMP and CMMC in a lot of ways. You get FedRAMP equivalent currently from one method, which was defined in a DoD memo, December of 2023, which is you have a FedRAMP 3PAO, of which A-LIGN is also, come in and assess your cloud service offering against the FedRAMP moderate baseline and issue a report showing that you're meeting all of them, meaning you have no POAMs left, And then you provide a body of evidence to your clients showing I am FedRAMP equivalent. I have had included in this body of evidence a 3PAO come in and assess me against this. So that's one that I get a lot. I get a lot of questions around FedRAMP equivalency. Am I a cloud provider or not? My clients, my DIB organizations are sending me CUI, and they're saying I need FedRAMP. That doesn't make sense. That's where that comes from. If anybody's listening and you're getting that question.
Yeah, that's good. Definitely a challenge to sort through all the noise and chaos.
It is. There's a lot to work through. It's very fun trying to stay up to date on everything CMMC and FedRAMP. FedRAMP's going through a lot of changes right now as well with FedRAMP 20X. So yeah, always more to learn and constantly stay up to date on.
Do you have any insights? I forget the proposed DFAR, but that this CMMC standard is going to apply now to the entire federal government. Any insight on that? What are your thoughts on that? How do you guys see in that shift their influence?
Yeah, the FAR CUI rule. So yeah, I mean, as it looks right now, it does appear that some level of 800-171 compliance will be a requirement for the broader federal contract landscape, not just the Department of Defense contractors. What will that actually end up looking like? TBD. They're still going through the rulemaking process. There's a draft that you can go read right now. And then it's a little bit TBD on, okay, if they do require, federal contractors at all federal agencies to comply with 800-171, what do they go with, right? Are they going to go down the same path that DOD did? Hey, just be compliant. Hey, self-attest to meeting these. Or are they going to say, hey, you need a third-party validation? And even further than that, hey, CMMC is already a program that was built to validate that you're compliant in this 800-171. Will they just accept CMMC certification for those other ones? That's a little bit TBD. You'd be kind of reading the tea leaves a little bit and making educated guesses. But I think that would be a logical process and a logical way that it would head. Does logic always prevail? No, but it may head that way.
Yeah. It's here to stay, I think. That train has definitely left the station. So
without a doubt. If there's anything to summarize with, like, CMMC is very real. It is going to be affecting you very soon, probably sooner than you think. And if you're fence sitting still, start reaching out to people and seeing, where you're at in the process and where you might need help with, because it is not going away. In fact, it's probably closer than you appear. Maybe to wrap it up with your initial analogy, maybe you're looking at the tsunami in the rear view mirror that says objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. How about that?
Perfect. What a way to put a bow on this. Matt, this has been super fun. I do look forward to, just having you around, but going to see a little improv.
Yeah. We'll post a video update. I'll get David on stage doing some improv, and that'll be a whole podcast episode. It's just
that'll be a supplement to this podcast.
Yeah.
I do need to start a one-off podcast where it's spinoffs from the DIB innovators, where there's now it's humor based.
Yes. Yeah. And it's just you doing improv every week.
Yeah.
Really.
I'm not an improv guy. just ask me about that. So if folks want to get help, they want to talk to A-LIGN, how best do they, put this ball in motion, even to just ask some very basic questions? They're not committing. How best do they do that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, feel free to reach out to us directly. Info at A-LIGN. It is, as you may see here, A-LIGN. info@align.com, or go to our website, click some contact us forms. You can go to my personal LinkedIn if you want, request to connect with me. I'm desperate, so I'll connect with anybody. And then, you can feel free to direct message me on there. Even if you just want to ask a specific question, but you're like, hey, I don't want to hop into a sales call already. But if you have a specific question for me, just hit me up with a DM on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to help however I can.
That is great. Thanks so much, Matt. Appreciate it. And until next time.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was fantastic. I can't wait to do some improv together very soon, my friend.